film opens on a vast, desolated wasteland. Years ago, this region was a thriving agricultural hub that supported countless families. A young narrator notes that he has never witnessed these fields looking vibrant. However, his father vividly recalls a completely different era, a time when local farmers successfully cultivated wheat and various crops. Everything went downhill following consecutive famines and severe droughts. The territory gradually transformed into a barren desert. No vegetation could manage to grow anymore, forcing most farming families to pack up and leave. Yet Jerome's father, Ernest, refused to give up his dream. He genuinely believed that this dirt would eventually turn green again. The sole obstacle standing in his path was water. In this bleak world, water was so scarce that individuals would gamble their lives just to obtain it. From the start, we witnessed the sheer desperation of the survivors. Two thieves attempt to break into a padlocked storage shed. Ernest catches them red-handed and swiftly drives them away. When he finally unlocks the facility, we see an antique water pump concealed inside. For a brief second, it looks like their fortunes might change. However, the moment Sim tries to crank it, the engine completely dies. There is simply no moisture remaining under the soil for the pump to extract. Left with no alternative, Ernest and Jerome travel to the local water cartel. Across this entire wasteland, only a single functional well exists. The tyrants managing it essentially rule the entire territory because they dictate who gets access to moisture. Ernest humbly requests a small allocation of water to irrigate a tiny plot of his farm. The corrupt dealer agrees, but only on the condition that Ernest pays an exorbitant fee. Sadly, that amount is light years beyond what Ernest can currently afford. Heartbroken, the father and son start their grueling trek back home. Mid-journey, the beast of burden hauling their gear unexpectedly snaps its leg. Realizing there is no way to treat it or finish the trek together, Ernest makes the painful choice to put the suffering animal down. Once back home, we meet Jerome's sister, Mary, who serves them a meager meal. Next, a devastating detail subtly highlights just how brutal daily survival has become. Instead of cleaning plates with water, Mary scrubs them with wet dirt because clean moisture is far too valuable to waste. The next morning, Ernest and Jerome head to a droid market. Since they are without their pack animal, they require a rugged machine capable of transporting heavy cargo through the dunes. That is where they spot a model named Sim. Multiple bidders compete for it, driving the price up rapidly. Ultimately, Ernest wins the bidding war and buys the machine. One onlooker is clearly furious hospital to see Jerome's mother, Catherine. She suffers from paralysis and requires a specialized medical exoskeleton to walk again. Regrettably, the device is astronomically expensive, meaning the family has no choice but to leave her stranded there until they can somehow raise the funds. On their return trip, they pull over at a ruined fuel station. There, Ernest does something shocking. To quench his agonizing thirst, he swallows a small amount of gasoline because fresh water is virtually impossible to obtain. Moments later, they encounter a desperate young couple begging for fluids. Their circumstances are so bleak that they are actually planning to abandon their infant because they lack the basic resources to keep the child alive. Ernest instantly commands them to stop. Instead, he vows to share his own water supply however he can. But before they separate, the young father quietly shares a dark secret. He warns Ernest that his daughter has been secretly seeing an outsider. The minute Ernest gets back to the farm, he confronts Mary about the affair. She confesses to it immediately. Then, staring right at her father, she states that he cannot dictate her future forever and that she despises his strict rules. Those words deeply wound Ernest. Consumed by rage, he locks Mary inside her bedroom. He even boards up the windows, ensuring she cannot escape. This marks the moment where internal conflict begins to tear the family apart. Shortly after, Ernest and Jerome notice that their new machine is completely gone. Someone has hijacked Sim. Ernest instantly blames Flem since he was obsessed with acquiring that specific droid at the auction. But before Ernest can hunt him down, a fresh crisis strikes. The water cartel ambushes Ernest because they suspect someone has plundered a portion of their reservoir. No matter how much Ernest pleads his innocence, the thugs refuse to listen. The confrontation rapidly escalates into a violent brawl. After fighting desperately to survive, Ernest finally manages to seize his shotgun, keeping the cartel guards at bay just long enough to flee into the darkness. While tracking his path home, he spots a figure passed out by the roadside. It is Flem, and resting right next to him is Ernest's stolen droid. In that instant, Ernest realizes that Flem did not just steal the machine, but also plundered the missing reservoir supply. Eager to vindicate himself, Ernest takes Flem hostage and begins marching him back to the cartel, so the real truth can be exposed. As the pair trek through the scorching sun, The intense heat begins to break them down. Both Ernest and Flem become dangerously dehydrated. Flem suggests that they should consume some of the liquid he plundered from the cartel reserves. The two pause for a brief rest and gulp down some fluid. While recuperating, Flem attempts to negotiate. He begs Ernest to release him, promising they can divide the profits from the machine evenly. However, Ernest refuses to believe him. He forces him onward, determined to validate his innocence. Before long, the brutal environment saps the last of Ernest's energy. He is barely able to maintain his balance. Capitalizing on the moment, Flem abruptly strikes him with a heavy stone. The impact leaves Ernest fatally wounded, and despite everything he endured, he does not make it. With Ernest dead, Flem heads directly to Mary's cabin. He reunites with her, and the pair slip away as if nothing occurred. In the meantime, Jerome becomes plagued with anxiety when his father fails to return home. He ventures out to find him. Along the trail, he stumbles upon the lost droid. Then a short distance ahead, he uncovers the devastating sight. His father is dead. Jerome reports the killing to the authorities, and the community assumes the malfunctioned droid was responsible for the accident. No one suspects foul play. Shortly after, Flem integrates himself into the household. He takes over the role Ernest used to hold. And when Jerome beats the robot in a fit of rage over his father's passing, Flem coaxes him to stop. During their chat, Flem confesses that he is in love with Mary and intends to marry her. Though Jerome is still mourning, he ultimately gives his blessing to the arrangement. Months fly by. One afternoon, Flem bargains with the water cartel and demands they route an irrigation line to Ernest's property. Initially, the boss mocks the request. Why waste valuable moisture on a dead man's dream? But the dynamic flips when Flem subtly implies that Ernest is permanently out of the picture. To prove he is not bluffing, he reinforces his demand with a blade. The terrified dealer quickly complies. Soon, moisture finally flows onto the soil Ernest dedicated his life to believing in. Neighbors gather in celebration as the parched dirt absorbs water once more. Flem labors around the clock every single day, and after a few months, vegetation finally starts sprouting. For the first time in a generation, the homestead begins to recover. The family finally experiences a flash of joy. Flem weds Mary, and the three of them try to build a life inside Ernest's house. However, prosperity is short-lived. One day, agents from the banking firm show up, mortgage years ago, that was never paid off. The property rightfully reverts to the firm unless the balance is settled. Flem has invested months of agonizing sweat into reviving these crops. There is no way he will surrender everything now. The sum required is staggering, and somehow he must acquire the cash. That is when he tracks down a former contact, the same young father from before who had nearly traded away his newborn because he could not feed the infant. Capitalizing on the man's dire straits, Flem brings him to the homestead, aiming to negotiate what the child could bring on the black market. But upon arriving, Flem discovers the infant has already been sold to another buyer. Shortly after, the human traffickers arrive, and this is where Flem demonstrates just how ruthless he truly is. He suddenly betrays his associate, leaving him for dead, and intercepts the cash that was traded for the infant. During the gunfire, a stray round pierces the droid. The damage corrupts its hard drive, triggering a hardwired emergency protocol. Without anyone noticing, Sim reboots and starts marching back to its original assembly plant. The very next day, Flem utilizes that blood money to settle Ernest's debt at the bank. Jerome believes the funding came from selling the machine. Consequently, nobody inquires about where the cash actually originated. Meanwhile, the broken machine successfully crosses the frontier to the manufacturing plant. Not long after, Jerome gets an unexpected incoming call. The corporate staff informs him that Sim has arrived safely at their laboratory. Jerome is completely bewildered. Flem had assured everyone the machine was already traded away, so why was it sitting in a corporate facility? That same afternoon, Jerome demands to know what actually happened to the droid. The interrogation instantly puts Flem on guard. Noting this shift, Jerome cleverly drops the matter. Instead, he casually mentions he is visiting his mother at the ward tonight, but that is merely a calculated lie. His actual destination is the manufacturing facility across the border. Once Jerome gains entry to the robotics lab, the mechanics showcase every feature integrated into the machine. One specific utility immediately grabs his focus. The droid features an automated video drive that recorded every event it witnessed. Jerome plays back the files and finally views precisely what happened to his dad. The playback uncovers the truth. Flem was the one who murdered Ernest. Jerome breaks down in tears as he watches the final moments unfold on screen. That night, he silently slips back home, but he keeps quiet for now. A bit later, Jerome and Flem head out into the wild to hunt. Once they return, Jerome stealthily tucks his father's old rifle beneath his mattress. Then over dinner, he casually mentions to Flem that Robbie has been looking for him. Robbie, the exact individual Flem assumed was long dead. For a split second, Flem panics. The statement visibly rattles him. The following morning, Flem gets a note. It is signed with Robbie's initials. It tells him to meet at an isolated location. Flem has no clue that Jerome forged the note himself. Puzzled, yet intrigued, he decides to go anyway, wondering if Robbie somehow survived the encounter. Before departing, he kisses Mary goodbye and walks to the rendezvous point. He continuously shouts out Robbie's name. Then, without warning, the soil collapses right beneath his feet. He plummets into a deep trench, shattering both of his legs. Trapped at the bottom, Flem frantically screams for assistance. Instead, Jerome appears at the edge. Flem instantly pieces it together. Jerome knows the secret. He frantically argues that Ernest's death was a total accident, but Jerome refuses to buy it. He aims his father's rifle and closes Flem's chapter once and for all. 2 days later, Jerome returns to the farm. Mary is still waiting for her groom, expecting him to walk through the entrance at any second. Jerome conceals the horror. He merely tells her to give it a bit more time. A brief moment later, Mary joyfully notes that they finally possess enough funds to retrieve their mother, because they can now purchase the costly life support device she requires. In the story's concluding moments, Jerome permanently wipes every file saved inside the machine. The reality of Ernest's murder vanishes forever, leaving only silence buried deep within the soil his father never stopped loving.